Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Cannoning Remastered Episode 5. In this episode, we're going to be talking about triangling, barrels, and final boosters. So in the last episode, we talked about increasing range of this concrete cannon and how we could adjust it in the y-axis. In this episode, we're going to be taking that to the logical next step and talking about how we can adjust a cannon in both the y and the x-axis. So in this case here, we could adjust this cannon up and down to make it shoot different points in this wall. The next goal for this cannon is to be able to shoot both up and down and left and right. So theoretically, you can sort of hit anywhere in this wall. So this has been the current setup here for the relationship between the power and the projectile for the last 4 or so videos. So of course, this will exert a positive y and a positive x velocities on this TNT, and you'll end up getting something like that. So what we're going to do in this video here is essentially just turn this from a 2D plane into a 3D plane so that we can get positive X, Y, and Z velocities on this piece of TNT here. So this is going to lead to the introduction of something called a barrel, which is essentially where you manage all your power and your projectiles to get the correct exposures and the correct flight paths for your TNT. In order to learn how these barrels work and why they're so important, I'm going to demonstrate the TNT flight paths here. So in an ideal situation, what's going to happen is your TNT is going to get shot from your power and it's going to go up. We always go up first. And then ideally, what's going to happen next is that TNT is going to fly across, at which point it hits another guider, it loses its X or Z velocity depending what direction the cannon's facing, and then it will go forwards and hit the wall. So that's what this cannon should look like and what it should do. However, if we get a different situation and we get the wrong velocities in the barrel, what's going to end up happening is the TNT is going to fly up and then it's going to go forwards. And what that means is we're not going to lose that sideways velocity when we hit the wall. We're going to hit the wall and we're going to keep going in that sideways direction and we're going to fly off to the side. So what the barrels are going to allow us to do is carefully manage the velocity we get on the projectile in order for us to triangle the correct way first, which is going to be up, across, and then forwards to the wall. In order to consistently get the correct triangling out of the barrel, we need to introduce some non-solid or non-full blocks into our barrels. So this is stuff like ladders, walls, glass panes, chests, basically anything that when you look at it, it visually is not the size of a full block. So there's a bunch of different types here, and they're all going to affect your cannon performance. So triangling works differently between 1.8 and 1.18, but in both cases, we're going to need to essentially get the projectile into a different position in the barrel. So for example, a 1.8 barrel here, what we need to do is we need to align or fire our projectile into the side of the ladder to get it to triangle correctly. So we need to introduce something called a final booster. What our final booster will do is apply velocities to our projectile to shoot it into the barrel, give it the correct alignment and positioning within the barrel so that then we can triangle correctly into the walls. So essentially what these final boosters are cannons with inside cannons. So typically what a final booster will look like is a large vertical stack of dispensers that drops into a water source. So in both versions, what it's going to look like is something like this. Now, you don't need a hell of a lot of power for your final boosters, you just need to get it far enough so that it goes into your barrel. So typically final boosters are built to be as compact as possible while still providing enough TNT to get the projectiles into the barrel. So what this also means is that when we fire our projectiles into the barrel, they need to be shot into the barrel at the correct time. If the projectile enters the barrel too late, the power will have already exploded and it will hit the ladders here, fall down, and then blow up in the barrel and blow your cannon up. If the projectile is too early, it will hit the ladders, fall all the way down, the sand will break on the carpet, the TNT will not provide enough velocity for the scatter to get out of the barrel, it will blow up and you will lose your cannon. So we need to correctly time our final booster so that it gets our projectiles in the barrel at the perfect time. Typically for most cannons, the time between your final booster firing and your power firing is one redstone tick. This can change depending on the Cannon schematics, but usually it's one redstone tick. So if our power is going off after 3 redstone ticks, we want our final booster to be going off at 2 redstone ticks. Additionally, when we start timing our sand, we need to time our sand off the final booster. So instead of the sand firing at 38 redstone ticks after the power goes off, we need to time it off the final booster instead. So our sand is going to be going off at 38 redstone ticks after the final booster instead. However, with our scatter is more finely timed. So our scatter is going to still be timed off our main power. In this case here, the cannon is 2 redstone ticks between the power and the scatter. If, for example, we do 2 redstone ticks after the booster here for this cannon, it's then going to be 1 redstone tick between the power and the scatter, and we're going to get less range out of it. So we want to be timing our scatter 2 redstone ticks after our power. We want to be timing our sand 38 redstone ticks after our final booster, and that will give us the final timings that we need for this cannon. At this point here, I'm going to get into the version-specific triangling mechanics. So I'm going to start with 1.18 because I'm already here on this plot, and then we're going to get into 1.8 triangling. To understand how triangling works in 1.18, an easy way to look at it is to draw some lines to this TNT. So start by drawing a diagonal line from there to there. I'm not going to do this in paint, but you can just imagine it. And then a straight line in the x-axis, and then a straight line in the z-axis. So why I say that is because the greater of those two distances is the direction that the TNT triangles first. So if we imagine we shoot our projectile into a ladder like this, we're going to have a block on the x-axis. So these are going to be a block apart in the x-axis, and they're going to be less than a block apart in the z-axis. What that means is the greater value triangles first. So in this case here, we're going to shoot up, and then we're going to shoot forwards. Now, at the start of the video, I explained why this is a no-no setup. So what we need to do for our 1.8 cannon is ensure that the distance that we want to triangle in first is greater. So how we do that, and how most players commonly do that, is use something like a chest barrel. So that means that the distance is slightly greater in this axis than it is in the other axis, which means we're going to hit that chest, we're going to triangle up. Now, because the distance is greater, we're going to triangle across, and then we're going to triangle forwards. So now that we know the style of barrel that we want for 1.18, all that we have left to do is implement it into this cannon. Before talking about the final boosters, I'm just going to take a very, very quick detour to talk about carpet here. Now, carpet is a very, very handy block because it will block TNT from going through it, but it also provides a very, very large amount of exposure to your barrel here. So on some servers, water will actually break carpet. In this case with Crystal here, water does not break carpet. If your server breaks carpet with water, just replace the carpet with trapdoors and they will do just about the same thing. So now I'm going to show you the final booster wiring that I use in most of my cannons in 1.18. So this setup here is essentially just a remake of this sliding observer wiring that we used for the power, except we're essentially just using an intermediate block. So what that's going to mean is when we power this block here, it's going to power those 2 adjacent dispensers by that star powering, and it essentially means we can use all the same blocks to power a booster. Again, these dispensers are facing inwards so that we can get all the TNT in the same block, so we don't need to use another booster to move all that TNT around. And all that we have left to do is add in our sand and our scatter, and then time everything, of course. So now I have the concrete and the scatter added. I talked about the timings at the start of the video. All that is left for us to do is implement these timings. So in this part of the video, I'm going to introduce something called a reference point. That reference point is going to be the point that I count the rest of the timings of the cannon from. In that case, I'm going to use this line of redstone here. So when I'm timing out this booster here, we want this final booster to go off 1 redstone tick before our power. So we count to our power. We have our power going off at 1, 2, 3, 4 redstone ticks. So we want this final booster to go off at 3 redstone ticks. We count for the pistons and the observer here. So that takes off 2 redstone ticks. So all we need is 1 redstone tick. So all we need to do is add 1 redstone tick repeater there. And now this is correctly timed. Cool. Next thing to time this scatter here. So we want that to go off 2 redstone ticks after our power. So our power is going off at 1, 2, 3, 4. So we want this scatter to go off at 6. So we count from here, 1, and that means we need to add 5 more redstone ticks to have this going off at the correct time. So what I'll do is I'll add 1 repeater there, and then a 4 tick repeater there. Cool. So our scatter is now timed correctly. Now, our concrete powder, we want to go off 38 redstone ticks after this booster. So we're going to wire that in from basically this line of blocks here. What I'm going to do is counter the booster. So 1, 2, 3. Our booster goes off at 3. 38 redstone ticks after the booster will leave us with a grand total of 41 redstone ticks. So we will need 11 repeaters here. 1, 2, 11. 4 of those are going to be on, or 10 of those are going to be on 4 ticks, and 1 is going to be on 1 tick, leaving us with a grand total of 41 redstone ticks. At that point then, our cannon should be complete and correctly timed, so I'll cut ahead to that. So now this should be our completed concrete cannon. Now, again, we're going to be using a vertical guide here for the final booster, and that's going to give us the correct position in the barrel for our Y height. Again, we will shoot into these chests to get the correct triangling, and that's pretty much it. So let's TNT fill it, and let's see if it works. Excellent. So you can see we get a nice little hole there, and that is exactly where our guider is. So this cannon works. Let's change the Y height a little bit, and we'll also change the X guider as well. So that means we're going to go up, hit here, hit this adjust, go forwards, and hit about there on the wall. Let's have a look. Excellent. And now what I'll do is I'll shift this guider all the way over, and we will drop the Y by a little bit as well, and let's shoot about there. So now we should end up with a hole about there on the wall. Excellent. So this is the power of having both an X and a Y adjust on a cannon. You can essentially shoot anywhere on a 2D plane. That makes it incredibly powerful for later cannons. So this concludes the 1.18 portion of this video. Now I'm going to finish off the video with the 1.8 portion. So now I'm going to talk about triangling in 1.8. It functions similarly, except the shorter distance goes first. What that means is if we shoot our projectile into the barrel, say from our final booster here, hits the ladders here, and then our power goes off, what's going to happen is the game is going to have a look at the distances between the X and the Z axis. So in this case here, if we shoot against a ladder, we imagine that the TNT is between those 2 blocks, but I'm just going to place it there for the time being. The distance that is shorter goes first. What that means is we have a block in the, the x-axis. However, we have a less than a block in the z-axis. And that's because we've shot it into the side of that ladder there. The ladder is a non-full block. So what that means is the shorter distance goes first. Since we're dealing with less than a block on that axis, what's going to happen is it's going to go up, hit the block there, and then it's going to go across. It'll hit the block there, and then go forwards, like that. If we were to use a more 1.8-esque setup by replacing the blocks there with chests, what's going to happen is our TNT is going to hit these chests. The distance is longer in this axis and shorter in this axis. So what it means is it's going to go up, and it's going to hit that block, then it's going to go forwards, and then it's going to go across. That's not what we want. I talked about that at the start of the video. So now we basically know that the barrel is identical to 1.18, except we just replace these chests with ladders. So our barrel will look something like this. At this point now, I'm going to transpose the barrel into this power setup, and we will talk about our final booster. So for the final booster here, we're essentially just using the same power wiring, except we're just going an extra block on the side here. Now, there is an alternate way that you can wire this that uses a mechanic called bud powering. I'm not going to cover that here, but I will cover it in a later video. But for the time being, this booster here will be sufficient. So this is our final booster. What we're going to do now is set up the sand, and we will talk about the timings after we do all that. So now I've got some extra quartz laid out. Let's talk about the timings. Again, start of the video, I mentioned that we want our final booster to go off 1 redstone tick before our power. So what we will do is use this redstone as a reference point and count all our timings from here. So this repeater here on 4 ticks means the power is going off at 4 redstone ticks. So we want our final booster to go off at 3 redstone ticks. What I'll do is just run this line of redstone out here and then add a 3-tick repeater here. At this point now, let's time our scatter. Now, the scatter is going to be a little bit different to the 1.18 scatter. So the 1.18 scatter, we needed to go off very, very early, so it stayed within the concrete. In this case here, we can add a bit more delay to the scatter. So what I might do is just add 3 repeaters like that. Now, this cannon is not going to function nearly as well as the 1.18 cannon because you guys don't get concrete. However, we can still show the fundamental mechanics of triangling regardless. Now, all that we have left to do is time out this piston here. So again, 38 redstone ticks between the power here, or this final booster, I should say, and this piston going off. So I've sort of got this line laid out around the back. So we're going to take the redstone from the power instead. So 38 redstone ticks after our final booster. What that means is our final booster is going off at 3. So the way that I've routed this redstone wire here, we're going to take into account 4 redstone tick repeater here. So that's going off at 3. That means the piston needs to push at 41. We've already got 4 redstone ticks here, so we need to get a grand total of 37 redstone ticks in this little area here. What I'll do now is I'll just cut ahead to that being completed, and I'll show you the working cannon. Now, unfortunately, this setup is not nearly as fun as the 1.18 setup, and that's because, yeah, you don't get concrete. However, we can still demonstrate the power of triangling here. Again, like the 1.18 setup, you can hit any position basically in the XY axis on this wall. So we can adjust it up, down, left, right. So if we go up, say to here, and then we go across to here, you can now hit even higher on this wall. Again, it's going to be a little bit harder because you're going to need to essentially stack all the way up with your sand and then blow a hole in the wall. However, it's still important to understand the fundamental mechanics here. So at this point now, the video is completed. Any questions, just shoot them in the comments. I've got a Discord with all the like timestamps and chapter titles and all that sort of stuff in the description. Feel free to join that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll catch you later.